Hello everyone and welcome to an extremely exciting research forum with Dr. Kelly Jakubowski. I'm going to start with the informal introduction and then do the formal introduction because I've known Kelly for a long time now, probably 10 years. And we first met at conferences presenting our research, and Kelly has always been a shining superstar. And we've been in touch through your time at Goldsmiths, where you studied, and then now you're at Durham, you're an assistant professor at Durham, and your career has been amazing. You know, you do really interesting research, and it's always a pleasure to come and watch you present and to admire what you do in the public domain. So personally, I'm really pleased that you're here as a friend, as a colleague, and as a really impressive academic. Formal bit. So you've been at Goldsmiths, but you've also worked at, and you've been a student in the USA, and you are now a Leverhulme Early Career Fellow, and you received a Hickman Early Career Research Award, which is a very big award, very prestigious, very hard to get, and is another. Pardon?
It's here.
And that was here, yeah, and that's another mark of your, really impressive research. So we're really excited to have you. And the other thing that I wanted to mention is that Kelly is not only extremely incredible in the research that she does, she's very talented at sharing that with different audiences, which is something I really admire. And not only have you published in world-leading journals, books, lots of other scholarship, Kelly does a lot with sharing research with the general public. You do a lot of radio interviews, you've worked with the BBC on your earworms research, and you've just published an article in The Conversation about your work on autobiographical memory, which I think is to be applauded and admired. I think that idea that you make your work relevant and interesting for not only the scholarly community, but outside of that, which is fantastic. So yes, so we're really excited. So Kelly is going to talk to us about the power of music, examining the relationship between music and autobiographical memory. So please welcome Kelly.
Thank you, Michelle, for that really nice introduction. I hope I can live up to all of that. As Michelle mentioned, I think a lot of my research is sort of inspired by the sort of questions that I see the general public asking about music. And so I think, these kind of questions around whether music is somehow sort of special as a cue for autobiographical memory. This is something that comes up a lot in sort of general public discourse, in sort of general, sort of literature and so on. And so this is something that I kind of got really interested in trying to understand the empirical basis for this, and whether there is some kind of explanation of the degree to which music may be a sort of powerful key for autobiographical memory. So just to start out with a definition of the topic I'm going to talk about. So this is my Leverhulme project on music evoked autobiographical memories. I'm going to present on a range of findings from that project. And this is broadly defined as the experience when listening to music brings back personal memories from your past. And that can be a range of types of memories. So sometimes we look just at sort of what we call episodic memories, so memories of specific events from our lives. But music can also evoke other more broad memories that may still be classified as autobiographical memories, but these may be memories of an entire time period of your life, such as your teenage years in general, or just memories associated with particular people or places from your life as well. So there's kind of a broad range of things that fall into this category of music evoked autobiographical memory. So as I mentioned, this is a topic that I thought was of great public interest as well. If you think about sort of examples in which the relationship between music and autobiographical memory has been explored sort of more broadly. So this program, Desert Island Discs, is a very long-running radio program. It just turned 80 years old, I think. And so this particular program, if you're unfamiliar with it, they bring on celebrities who nominate pieces of music that are particularly important to them, so that they would bring with them to a desert island if they were stuck on one. And then they use those pieces of music to sort of delve into those people's personal sort of histories and pasts, and why that music's important to them. So this is just, sort of one example where it's been sort of there's been a lot of popular interest around the idea of music as a particularly salient cue for getting people to talk about their lives. There's also been a range of these sort of popular clips on YouTube, for instance, of this idea that music might be able to reconnect people with memories from their pasts, in people who have dementia or Alzheimer's disease. So this particular documentary, Alive Inside, came out in 2014, I think, and this particular clip from it was a very popular clip at the time that had thousands or millions probably of views of this particular man sort of being brought back to memories from his past from listening to music. And then there's been various other sort of examples of these kind of clips that gained a lot of popularity in recent years as well. So just to give you a sort of general outline of the topics that I'm going to talk about today, I've kind of broken them up into a sort of initial general description of sort of what music-evoked autobiographical memories are like in general. So a more sort of descriptive overview, but also thinking about whether there's any kind of commonalities in the experience across different individuals. And then I'll talk a bit about how music-evoked autobiographical memories compare to other autobiographical memories. So for instance, memories cued by other cue types, whether that be visual cues or word cues or other sounds, for instance. And then I want to delve into this question of why music might be seen as somehow special as a cue for autobiographical memories, and whether we can sort of empirically start to test not only the fact that music might cue different types of memories than other types of cues, but why music might be somehow different as a cue, what makes it particularly effective in certain contexts rather than others, for instance. So yeah, this sort of initial overview, we've done a few studies where we've, for instance, looked at the experience of music-evoked autobiographical memories in everyday life. So this was a diary study we published a couple of years ago where we asked people to, over the course of a week, just keep track of any music-evoked autobiographical memories that came to mind in a diary, write descriptions of them, make some ratings of them, and so on. And we found that everyone in that particular study at least had one music-evoked autobiographical memory, and on average, people reported one about once per day, although that varied from individual to individual. Some people only reported one in the week, and some people reported lots more. We've consistently found in that particular study, but also some other studies using different methods, that music seems to bring back more positive memories than negative memories overall. So this is a plot from that diary study, but we've found very similar results in other types of methods where happiness tends to be the most reported emotion, and nostalgia is usually sort of second or third. And the more negative emotions like sadness and so on, they do occur, but they tend overall to be reported less frequently in response to music-evoked autobiographical memories. So it does seem to be that music may be particularly good at cueing, more positive than negative memories from our lives, perhaps. Now, when we've looked at sort of the content analysis of what people are reporting in their memories, again, in several different studies and using different methods, these associations with people tend to come up a lot more than, say, associations with places, although again, those do come up, but we see especially this link in terms of people reporting particularly memories that are particularly high in social content. So using words like my friend, my mother, my brother, us, and so on. So, and if you compare that to other types of autobiographical memories, you actually see more social content in the music evoked autobiographical memories in various contexts. So there, this link with people is quite interesting, I think, as well. I also looked across a few different studies, again, using slightly different methods, where we looked at just what were the most frequent words that came up in people's memory descriptions. And we see, again, words like friends, boyfriend, girlfriend coming up a lot, and these kind of contexts like school and car and driving, and memories related to dancing, going out clubbing or going to school dances and so on. And so if you kind of think about these particular words, you might also realize that maybe quite a lot of these memories are associated with a certain period of our lives. So for instance, our teenage years. And this relates to a general phenomenon that's been found in research in this area, not just on music, but autobiographical memory research more generally, which is the phenomenon of the reminiscence bump, which is when you ask people to recall memories from their lives, even in a sort of quite open, free way, they tend to disproportionately recall memories from the period between ages 10 to 30 years, so they're sort of teenage, early adulthood years in comparison to memories from other lifetime periods. And this is something, like I said, that's been shown in general about autobiographical memory, but it's also been shown for music-related autobiographical memories as well. So in this particular study, for instance, we found this sort of peak for music-related autobiographical memories around 14 years of age. And we compared that to a bunch of previous studies that had used word cues for triggering autobiographical memories. And we, again, found quite a similar peak, this one only slightly later at 14.7 years. So showing that, we do have this reminiscence bump for music-related memories, but it's not necessarily something specific to music. It seems to come up in relation to other cues as well. Similarly, this is from a study where we compared autobiographical memories evoked by music and evoked by watching TV. And again, you see we have a reminiscence bump for both cue types. Interestingly, it's a bit sort of more peaky for the music, although that wasn't a statistically significant difference. Yeah, there's sort of like preliminary evidence that maybe we have like more of this bump for music, but it doesn't, like I said, it's not a sort of significant result in the analysis, so something to explore further in the future. Yeah, I just wanted to show you a few examples now, just to kind of highlight maybe the diversity of different types of memories that are reported in our studies. I think some of you might have seen this before if you've seen some of my talks before, but these are some examples from our diary study where I've put the text of the memory on the screen and you'll hear the music playing that evoked that particular memory.
There's somewhere better, 'cause you always take me there. Came to you with a broken faith, gave me more than a hand to hold. Caught before I hit the ground. Tell me I'm safe. You
Right now I'm in a standing at the bus stop with my shopping in my hands when I'm overhearing elder ladies as the rumors start to fly. Hear them in the schoolyard, in the scrapyard.
Okay, so yeah, I just wanted to show this as a few sort of more concrete examples of the sort of diversity of types of memories that people are reporting. So like I said, there's some like very happy and family-related memories, but you do get these occasional instances of like very sad and even traumatic memories, or really mundane memories about buying cereal. So yeah, there can be quite a range of things that are invoked. And one question that I've been kind of thinking about a bit recently with some colleagues is the degree to which music-evoked autobiographical memories are sort of personal or idiosyncratic experiences as they're kind of often conceptualized, or whether there's actually some sort of similarity across people which might be constrained by like the ways in which we use different types of music and the cultural connotations of particular music. So as you might expect, so in our diary study, we had 220 music-evoked autobiographical memories reported, and across all of those, only 7 songs were reported by more than one person, and that was only 2 people in all of these instances. So it does seem to be very idiosyncratic in some way, in that, you know, lots of different music can cue autobiographical memories, there's not a huge amount of overlap across people when you ask people to sort of freely report autobiographical memories. However, if you look at, like, you know, even though these are kind of small samples, if you look at the songs that did trigger multiple memories across, you know, different people, you see kind of similar descriptions in these memories. So these are people who, you know, don't know each other, you know, might not even be in the exact same age range or anything, but, you know, so song Everywhere by Fleetwood Mac, for 2 different people, triggered memories of dancing at weddings for both of these people. Freed from Desire, for 2 different people, evoked memories of a crowd singing along to it. And then we also have these memories in this study, and actually in some other studies as well, coming up of Princess Diana's funeral, which is a real sort of you know, a cultural event that sort of brought sort of the whole nation together, seeing the same music. And so I think that's quite an interesting example, you know, these kind of examples where lots and lots of people have been exposed to the same music in the same context. So this is like very preliminary work, but I just wanted to show some of these examples. So this is from a study that I'll present in more detail a bit later in the talk. But basically, what we did here, this is together with my colleagues Lisa Margulis in Princeton and her excellent PhD student Kara and Ben, her postdoc. We looked at the memory descriptions that people reported in response to the same piece of music. And these 3 different word clouds are 3 different samples of participants who did different experiments, but we presented them all that same piece of music. So this is the piece of music that they heard. So you get the idea, and this is a highly unfamiliar piece of music to all these people, but it's quite interesting that this music is evoking like memories that are using similar types of words, suggesting that, you know, it kind of brings you back to a similar context, even if, you know, these are completely different people and completely different samples of people. Like I said, they are all people in the UK, and they're all generally kind of young adults, and that's one thing that we talked about in the postgrad forum earlier today, is that, you know, maybe if these were people from different cultures or even different age groups, there might be more diversity. But I think it's still interesting to look at these kind of commonalities and think about how the same music might evoke similar memories across people. And this is one other example from the analysis. get the idea. So like I said, that's quite early stage stuff, but I just wanted to show you some of those examples because I think it's quite interesting to start thinking about that kind of question. So moving on now to the sort of second group of studies that I'm going to talk about. So this is about how memes compare to other autobiographical memories. So there's been a range of research done in this area, some of my own studies and some other people's studies. So Amy Belfi did some of the really seminal work in this area where she did some studies comparing music as cues for autobiographical memories to photographs of famous faces. And these came from the same time period. They were matched in terms of time period, right? So if you heard a song by the Backstreet Boys, this was a study done in the US, you might see a picture of Jennifer Aniston, sort of popular around that same time period. And she compared these two cue types and found that actually people reported more autobiographical memories in response to the famous faces, but the memories were more vivid when they were cued by music. And the vividness was coded in terms of the actual memory descriptions people gave, the number or the sort of proportion of perceptual and internal details within the memories. And so, yeah, this was sort of probably the first study to really sort of rigorously compare music to another cue type, suggesting that music might be able to evoke more sort of vivid, perceptually detailed memories than certain other cues. So, various other studies have also compared music against other types of cues to see, music versus famous faces, we found a difference there, but what if we compare other sort of cultural products? So I looked at, in a study comparing music to watching TV, and we found that music-evoked autobiographical memories were rated as more vivid, positive, and emotionally intense. And we also then did a sort of content analysis of the words within the memory descriptions, and we found a greater percentage of social and perceptual words in the meme descriptions than memories evoked by watching TV. We're also working at the moment on writing up a study comparing music versus food cues. So this is actually a follow-up to the diary study. So we asked people to keep track of their music-evoked memories and their food-evoked memories each over the course of 4 days in their everyday lives. And we found across the sample that music-evoked memories were more frequent in everyday life and rated as more important memories to people. But interestingly, there were several properties that weren't different. So they were, both memory types were sort of quite positive in general, and then they didn't differ in terms of the valence ratings of the memories, so how positive they were. And they also didn't differ in vividness ratings. There's also been a range of research looking at music-evoked autobiographical memories in people with Alzheimer's disease, and probably one of the most sort of rigorous sets of studies is by Amy Baird and colleagues, and they found in this study they compared pieces of music versus photographs of famous events from the same time period, and they found that this sort of relative preservation of the frequency of music-evoked autobiographical memories in people with early-stage Alzheimer's disease in comparison to older adults, but this kind of decline in autobiographical memories evoked by photographs of famous events in that group with Alzheimer's disease. So suggesting that music might be a sort of more effective cue, at least in early stage of the disease in comparison to other cues like these photographs. So this kind of gives you an idea of the sort of range of different cues that music's been compared to before, and some sort of initial evidence that music, might trigger different types of memories and memories that are maybe more emotional and more vivid and so on. But I think there's still this quite big but important question of why would music be somehow special as a memory cue? Why would it trigger more emotional or vivid or more frequent memories? And I think this is a difficult question to answer, and we haven't fully answered this question yet. But I have some kind of suggestions about this and some initial studies that I've been doing, starting to probe this question. So one thing that might be at play here is simply that the events that are coupled to music are more emotional, more self-defining, more distinctive than events that we couple to other cues, like, I mean, if you think of the example of the famous faces, we might not, couple, the photo of Jennifer Aniston with memories of our wedding or our, childbirth or something like that. So we know that events that are more emotional, more self-defining, more distinctive are more accessible to recall. So maybe it's, maybe it's not actually even about the music, maybe it's just about the context in which we listen to music are quite special to us. And then music can serve as a cue for those particularly salient memories. So I think that's definitely a possibility in some of these cases. But I think there's also features of the cue, the music itself, that may also be playing a role here. And this is something that I've been starting to delve into further as well. So if you think about music in terms of the sort of exposure rate over our lifetimes, we re-engage with music quite frequently. We re-listen to our favorite songs over and over, probably a lot more than some potential cues. So like we probably definitely listen to our favorite music more than we might, say, read our favorite book or something like that. And so this re-listening might strengthen this link between music and associated memories. And music, one of the main things we know about music is it's inherently emotional. And we know from other research that emotional cues can evoke emotional memories. And so, that might also be the case, that it's actually the emotionality of the music that's really kind of coloring our emotional responses to these memories. The final thing is that, I'm sure this isn't the final thing, but the final point I've given as an example here is that music engages our attention. So in order for music to serve as a cue for an event later on, it has to be encoded together with that event. And it might be more likely to be encoded because it's something that we like and we pay attention to, rather than other background sounds that might be playing during an event, or the color of that wall. I might not really remember that as a good cue for my memory of this talk later on. Although now I will, because I've really attended to it. So I'm going to start, I'm just going to talk about a couple of studies where we've started to probe some of these aspects, looking at the sort of emotionality of music, how that impacts on autobiographical memory, as well as what we've conceptualized as familiarity, how that affects properties of autobiographical memory. The study that I'm going to talk about first is one that we published quite recently, which the sort of overall question really is whether music is still somehow special as a cue for autobiographical memories if you compare it against equivalently emotional retrieval cues. So this is something that hasn't really been done in previous research. So like I said, in these previous studies, music was matched to other cues, usually based on the time period in which they were likely exposed to. So like I showed that example with the Backstreet Boys and Jennifer Aniston. But other studies haven't really considered, how emotional the other cues are that were compared against music. So what we did is we ran 4 experiments. The first 2 compared music to environmental sounds that were matched in terms of their emotional expression to the music. And then in the next 2, we matched single words in their emotional expression to the music and used them as cues for autobiographical memories. So we used music extracts without lyrics, so that we weren't sort of the sort of semantic connotations of the lyrics weren't sort of biasing the types of memories that were recalled. It was more about the properties of the music itself. And these were from a range of genres. So there was classical, rock, pop, jazz, a whole bunch of different types of music. And we selected music and sound clips that were unfamiliar, but sort of familiar sounding, right? So like sort of rock music that sounds like rock music, but you've never heard that particular rock music before. And that was just to control for potential familiarity differences across different participants. We wanted to kind of keep that out of the equation for now. We'll look at the familiarity aspect later in another study. So this is just a sort of example of how we selected the cues that we used. So we had them sort of representing these different valence and arousal quadrants. So these were based on ratings in previous studies. Participants had rated how valence being how positive or negative the music or the word in this case was, and arousal being how sort of low energy or high energy it was. So to kind of map on some sort of basic emotions to that, so things that are positive in valence and high arousal, often emotions like happy fall into that quadrant, emotions like peaceful fall into this one, sad and angry, and obviously there's other emotions that fall into those quadrants as well, but those are the kind of like stereotypical ones you might think of for those quadrants. So you can see, yeah, these words were selected to represent those kind of emotions, and then I'm going to play you some examples of the music as well. So this is the positive valence, high arousal, so the sort of happy sounding music. The happy word matched to that was money, and I'll play you the happy sound as well. Okay, and to give you one example of negative valence, high arousal, so the more maybe sort of angry sounding, this was matched to the word tornado in this experiment. Okay, so basically we have this music, the sounds, and the words that are all sort of matched in terms of representing different sort of levels of valence and arousal, and we use them as cues for autobiographical memories in 4 online experiments. So they're presented a cue, the participant is presented one of these types of cues. There's a button that says, I have recalled the memory. They press that as soon as they've recalled the memory, but they don't have to recall a memory. They can also just not press it, and then it moves on to the next trial. So there's the option also to not record anything. So what we found consistently across all 4 studies is that the music evoked actually fewer memories overall than both the sounds and the words. And it also evoked memories consistently more slowly as well. So this suggests that music is not somehow sort of special in terms of how effective it is as a cue for autobiographical memories when you compare it to sort of emotionally equivalent cues in other either other modalities or other types of sounds. However, one other result that sort of replicated across all 4 experiments was that we found this interaction effect, essentially. So when people were presented positive cues, either music or sound, this is a graph from the first experiment, but we get a similar result in the other experiments with the words as well. So when people are presented positive music, words, or sound, they have relatively positive memories. But then when you have the negative cues, the negative music, so music that's, for instance, sad or angry, is still consistently evoking quite positive memories. And there's no difference actually between the negative and the positive music in terms of the valence of the memories that it's evoking. Whereas negative sounds and negative words evoked more negative memories from people's lives. So that's quite an interesting finding, that music may somehow be a bit different than other emotional cues in its ability to consistently evoke more positive memories, regardless of the valence of the music itself. And I would just say that there were very few other consistent differences between memories evoked by music and the other emotional cues. So, for instance, ratings of vividness, how important the memories were in the social content within the memories. There were some effects in like a single study, but didn't kind of replicate across the other studies. So this suggests that for the most part, music evokes phenomenologically similar memories to equivalently emotional cues. So it's really just that difference in sort of frequency that we see and the difference in the valence of the memories as well. Okay, so that's kind of a summary of that particular study, and then I just wanted to give an example of a subsequent study that's building on that study where we've used a similar sort of approach, but we've now added in familiarity as a variable of interest as well. So far, this is just looking at music, so we're not including the words and the sounds at this stage. So this is looking at how familiarity and emotionality of music impact on memory properties, or if they sort of interactively impact. So basically, we used a very similar design to what I've just described in the previous study, but we selected also familiar music. So we used the same unfamiliar music as before, and now we've also got some familiar music. So this is an example of one of the happy-ish pieces of music. So positive valence, high arousal. This is an example of the negative valence, high arousal. Okay, so, and I should also say we took just instrumental sections of the music again, and this was just a sample of young adults in the UK who participated, and we kind of validated the familiarity of the cues in advance in a pilot study, and we also asked the main participants as well if they were familiar with the cues, and overwhelmingly they were familiar. Just thought you wanted an encore of that. So yeah, just moving on to the sort of main results, and I think like the high-level summary of the results of this study is that the familiarity of the music primarily affects the accessibility of the memories. So if you have more familiar music, you have more memories reported, and they're retrieved faster. But interestingly, it didn't affect that many of the other properties of the memories. Whereas the emotional expression of the music, regardless of whether the music was familiar or not, it primarily affected the emotionality and ratings of the importance of the memories, which is interesting that it's kind of consistent across the familiar and unfamiliar music as well. A result that we found also in previous studies was replicated here, that more high arousal music elicited more high arousal memories, so more energetic music is eliciting memories that are more sort of energetic themselves. And we found that the negative valence and low arousal, so the sad, for instance, music, evoked the least positive memories. Interestingly, there was a bit of a sort of interaction here as well. There was an interaction here as well, where, as you kind of expect, both of the positive music types evoked quite positive memories. But interestingly, the angry music is evoking a bit more positive memories than the sad music. And if you look at the sort of memory descriptions, it sort of makes sense why this is happening. So a lot of the music memories evoked by angry or negative valence, high arousal music were memories of things like dancing in a club or singing along with your friends. So it seems like, this music that even if it's expressing a sort of negative emotion, it has this sort of upbeat tempo often, and it's often used in these kind of club settings, for instance. Whereas sad music more often had more of these kind of reports of listening by yourself, having some kind of heartbreak or a breakup. Again, there was a mix of different types of memories, but these were kind of coming up more often in the sad music category. And finally, we found this sort of reverse almost thing in the ratings of the importance of the memories. So you get that same kind of interaction, but it's flipped now, where actually the sad music is evoking memories that are rated as important as the happy and peaceful music, whereas the more angry music is evoking memories that are rated as less important. So it's interesting that even though the sad music is evoking memories that are rated as more sad, they're still rated as being quite important to people's life stories. So the question is about sort of how significant is this memory to your life story? So just to summarize the sort of what I've talked about today. So I started out by talking about how music is a common everyday cue for autobiographical memories, which on the whole, if you look at sort of all mean reports across like whole studies, they typically tend to be quite positive, quite social, and a predominance of memories from adolescence. Music can evoke more vivid and emotional memories than certain other everyday cues, such as TV shows or photos of famous faces. But the subsequent studies that I've been talking about suggest that such differences may at least partially be explained by the emotional and familiar nature of the music, potentially. So as we've shown in the sort of more recent studies, music is not a more effective cue than equivalently emotional stimuli and does not cue more vivid, unique, or important memories. This doesn't mean that music is a bad cue for autobiographical memories. It just means that it's maybe not special compared to cues that are also emotional cues, right? So one thing that we did find in the first study that I described to you was that music may be special in consistently evoking positive memories. So sad and angry music evoked more positive memories than sad and angry sounds and words, for instance, which is, which I think is quite interesting to kind of look into further in future research. It may have to do with this idea of music being a sort of aesthetic stimulus, that when we engage with negative sounding music, we still often have a quite sort of positive or cathartic experience when engaging with that, and that may be sort of coloring our sort of emotional responses to the memories we're reporting. And finally, we showed that familiarity and emotional expression of music cues impact, they both impact, but they impact different aspects to some degree of autobiographical memories. So I would suggest that these particular factors need to be accounted for a bit better in future studies, to really start to more sort of concretely understand the difference between music and other everyday cues in terms of the degree to which they differ in their ability to access different kinds of autobiographical memories. Okay, so I just wanted to say thanks to my co-authors, Thomas and Amy, and also my student co-authors. I need to get photos of them: Anita, Emma, Gemma, and Mark. And the Liverhume Trust for funding this research. And thank you all very much for listening today. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Brilliant, thank you, Kelly. I've got 4 or 5 questions.
Okay.
But so I'll just carry on until somebody waves from Zoom or someone waves. Oh, Jane's waving anyway. Can I ask my first one and then you can go? Is that okay?
Do you mind if I turn off your screen share just so it's easier for the
Zoom? I was wondering if you wanted to. Yeah.
That's great.
Which one am I going to pick before I hand over to you? Well, the first one was, I just wondered what the theories are in terms. It's really interesting research, and it has so much relevance in terms of how we use music, doesn't it, and how we make music, and how music is relevant for us. Is there what are the theories around why we have that reminiscence bump? Because it came out so strongly, didn't it, in the papers that you presented and the studies you presented early on. And why is it around 14? Is there something in developmental psychology that?
Yeah, so there's a few different theories around why the reminiscence bump exists. So it's part of them are to do with sort of that's our period, our main sort of period of identity formation, and so when we're kind of forming who we are. There's some sort of biological theories around like that, the way your hormones are. You might actually encode memories better at that time. And there's this kind of sort of related idea of sort of life scripts that like we have these kind of cultural sort of culturally constrained like sort of time points that are so like, you know, at this time you should form the most important friendships, and at this time you should get married, and so we have this kind of like timeline that's kind of culturally sort of constrained and imposed upon us, I suppose, right? So many of us feel like, you know, oh, your biological clock's ticking if you haven't had a baby, and these kind of things. So I think, you know, this kind of the identity formation thing and the kind of cultural life scripts kind of, they relate, but they're slightly different as well.
Quite a lot of pressure on parents, isn't it, to kind of let their children listen to whatever they want or not.
It's so funny because I came down to the kitchen last night and explained why the shade of pale, and of course that's exactly in my age. You know, that was exactly the age where I was just soaking up all the pop music of the time. And I said to my husband, "Oh, I'm back in Bamborough Bar," actually because that was the top song on the jukebox when I went to university a few years later. There's a huge literature on autobiographical memory and the Reminiscence bump that, you know, I remember from undergraduate studies, and it does tie in, as we say, with theories of identity formation in the 7 ages that Eric Erikson, the stages, ages and stages, stuff. So that all goes very well. You explained it beautifully, I thought. Thank you very much. Okay, so my questions. So one was, could you put up that lovely slide with the different explanations, and I was thinking, is there a way of being able to tease out kind of pathways between them? That doesn't look to me as though that's the way you've tried to do it in your approach, and you've done a series of experiments. But are you getting towards structural equation modelling and a pathway for the different explanations? That's one question.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think, so I think, you know, in like the sort of last study, we kind of looked at least, you know, sort of 2 factors, the familiarity and the emotionality, and also looked at how those 2 things interact, and actually they didn't interact at all. So I think we're trying to start to take account of like sort of multiple factors within the models, but I think, you know, at this stage, we've still only just looked at factors related to the music cues rather than the features of the events themselves. We have a bit of data I'm working on from the diary studies at the moment, which has a little bit of both things. So it has kind of some features related to, you know, how often people have heard a piece of music, and some features related to how much a memory's been rehearsed. So maybe we can like start to consider both of those sort of the event related and the music related factors together in sort of one model. I think that would be a definite overall goal to get to, definitely.
And what you're taking into, actually, when we talk about how often an event is rehearsed, it actually takes us into theories of narrative memory. You know, I often thought that it was actually the experience of childbirth. If we remembered what actually happened, it just wouldn't bear thinking about. What we remember is the story, is the narrative we tell about it. And that's what underlies narrative therapy. But it's, but yes, I mean, that's really interesting. So the music that goes, the playlist that goes along with the story of the event, as much as, or the music becomes part of the event, in the way that it's told.
Yeah,
okay.
definitely.
I'll do my second question very quickly. And I wondered whether you could speak to how your research ties in with the other body of literature on why sad music is pleasurable. And that's another huge literature.
Yeah.
Why do we like sad music more than we like so-called happy music?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think as I kind of alluded to, the idea that, yeah, even these, so we have slightly different results in the two studies, but basically, if you take the study that's comparing music against other cue types, you see, music evoking more positive memories, even when the music is sad or angry, and so this literature on why sad music is pleasurable, like Thomas's studies. There's also like a parallel, smaller literature on why angry music is pleasurable. Bill Thompson and colleagues, for instance. And I think, yeah, I mean, I think there's like a few possible sort of ways to sort of link that in, right? So it could be that when people are hearing, say, a piece of sad music as a cue, even though that music's expressing sadness, they're like, oh, actually, I really like that music, or it's making me feel moved, and it's actually a positive experience. And that's been shown that there's this kind of group of people that really get a sort of positive experience out of listening to sad music. And so that might be actually the reason that, they're listening to that sad music, they have this positive emotional response, and then that triggers them to have a positive autobiographical memory. Or it could be that, they hear the sad music and it actually does make them feel sad, but they just happen to remember a context in which they heard sad music that was a positive context, right? So they still feel sad when they hear the music, but then the memory that they retrieve is, oh, I went to a concert with my friends and we heard this sad piece of music together, and so I was together with my friends and it's nice. So I think there's kind of like a few different routes that this could be happening via, and I think, it might be different for different people as well, right? And so I think, tracing these different routes of sort of music, memory, and emotion is quite complicated, but I think, it's definitely something that needs to be looked into in terms of the sort of time scale of when things are happening. I'm not sure I answered your question, but
No, you did, absolutely. We didn't even mention prolactin.
Can I ask my other one that's kind of linked to that?
Yeah.
Which is that, because you showed that really nice data set about, out of 220 songs or something, 220 responses, only 7 songs repeated. How much do you think might be generalizable if you have a population that has had a similar cultural background and is of similar age? And do you think with a bigger sample size there might be something that's generalizable about the type of music that involves the type of memory, specific memories, or are individual differences a bigger factor?
Yeah, I think both things happen. I would say probably the individual differences are a bigger factor, but that would just be like my guess. But I think that like those examples I showed after of like the fact that unfamiliar music is eliciting some kind of similarity in memory descriptions, that there is definitely there is some level of similarity, but I think like probably it's that's not the whole story, right? The individual differences might still be playing a slightly larger role. I don't know, it's something, you have to kind of model like both of those factors and see.
Can I ask another one?
Yeah.
Which is linked to that as well. Which is that, I mean, because it's fascinating, isn't it? Because your research ties in so much to how music has been used for, not evil exactly, but purposes to sway people to be of a particular disposition, like the music that Donald Trump used, or the music that adverts use to make us like their very expensive product. Do you think that your research does tie in with some of that way in which music can be used to influence us and our memories and our feelings in ways that perhaps, firstly, we're not aware of, and secondly, might sometimes be a bit sneaky?
Yeah, I think that's probably the case, and I think the nostalgia factor is definitely used by advertisers a lot. When they're trying to target a certain age range to buy their product, play music that is from your reminiscence bump, and I think I mean, I think there's definitely there's this separate sort of research literature that's emerging on sort of musical nostalgia, and I think that's really an interesting area as well. And but yeah, I think, I think they know they're doing it. They know how to.
They know it, they're clever. It makes me think of one of the latest Minions films where the baddie is like an 80s rock star, and it came out only a couple of years ago, didn't it? And obviously that baddie who plays an electric guitar and chews bubble gum, and my two sons have got no idea what all that's referring to, but they're trying to get at the parents.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, and Disney's doing that as well, right? They're remaking all of the movies that came out when I was a child, right?
Yeah.
So, because they're like, well, even if my children don't want to go to it, I'll take them to it. I mean, I want to see The Lion King again. Tricky.
I've got one more, but I thought this has got. Oh, sorry, Alex.
Alex.
Oh, me. Okay, sorry. I wasn't sure if you meant me. Thanks, Kelly. That was really interesting. You just mentioned, I was going to go back to sort of the point before Michelle's last question. You raised a few times that kind of individual differences, and I was just wondering if we could go right back to your beginning data and the frequency of memes and all of that. Do you have any kind of clues as to what individual differences might be going on there? I mean, in that or in any of your data, actually.
So individual differences in terms of like which individual differences are driving which pieces of music cue autobiographical memories, or how individual differences affect the types of music evoked autobiographical memories?
Yeah, I suppose the second, I mean, we know that music is going to be really individual. So, I think that's a striking finding, but it's not a surprising one. But, we've done this sort of thing in lots of studies. I've found the same kind of things, but I guess it's more the kind of the way in which people seem to have these musical experiences. So, some people have them frequently, some people have them once a day, that kind of thing. Some people are more drawn to the sad music or the angry music and still have positive emotions, except just sort of, do you have any ideas about what it is that's going on there?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I mean, at the moment we're running a study that I've only just started running, which is looking at a few different individual differences, variables in relation to the number, but also the features of music evoked autobiographical memories. And there we're kind of targeting things that we know affect autobiographical memories in general. So we're looking at vividness of visual imagery, vividness of auditory imagery, but we're also looking at things specific to musical engagement. So we're looking at Gold MSI, for instance, right? Music training, musical engagement, and the Barcelona Music Reward questionnaire as well. So reward sensitivity to music. So I don't have any sort of results on that, but basically, we're trying to understand the degree to which not only sort of factors that we know affect autobiographical memory, but factors related to the way they engage with music and how they respond to music, whether that might also play a part in the types of autobiographical memories that they report.
Okay, cool. So we'll wait and see.
Yeah, that was the half answer. Like leave you hanging until the next talk.
Thank you.
Can I sneak in and ask my next one? Oh no, Barbara's got one. Oh,
Hello, Kelly. Thank you very much for your presentation. Really fascinating. Something I've always found quite frustrating as a music scholar is that the music from my teenage, when I started playing in lots of orchestral courses all the time, pretty much, I had this incredibly strong memory of the pop music and also the orchestral music that I played at that time, but it's sort of stuck in this sort of memory, so I can't be critical about it in any way. I get mainstream Austro-German composers of the 19th century mixed just because I remember which song I liked and who I liked, which young boy or whatever I liked, and there's something frustrating. So I've never been able to specialize in 19th century orchestral repertoire as a result. It's sort of clouded any sort of critical engagement.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So yeah, I mean, I think that's quite an interesting point that like different sort of different pieces of music can become linked, and they don't have to be so in your case they're related just by your sort of time period of exposure, rather than those genres being any sort of similar, or there being similar musical features between them. You've demonstrated that they're quite different, but so yeah, I think that's quite an interesting question. Like,
But but I also can't get away from it. I can't suddenly think about this orchestral music in a way that I would about early 20th century. I'm a musicologist, so I had to almost shift my specialism, because that music was sort of out of bounds. It was just attached to me as a teenager.
Interesting. Yeah, it was like it was too personal or something, or personal in a very specific way, and you couldn't look at it in a, I guess, yeah, being able to sort of distance yourself to sort of look at music maybe more objectively or study it is maybe in contrast to the sort of very personal associations we have during the Reminiscence bump, when that sort of crucial sort of identity formation aspect. That's quite an interesting example of yeah, of how that affected your career choice.
Absolutely.
Thank you for that talk. It was absolutely fascinating. I have two questions. So the first one is like, do you think that you find more positive / mixed emotions in the news because people don't re-engage with music that kind of evokes negative emotions, so they're not re-engaging it and they're not reinforcing their memory, so you're less likely to see negative emotions being triggered by music?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I would say partially yes, but partially maybe not, because so some of the studies that have looked at that are things like I mentioned, like a diary study where it's people's personal music preference and choice that they're reporting, I listened to this piece of music and I have this memory. But then other studies are more sort of experimental selected cues, where sometimes we actually specifically select like a range of music that conveys a range of emotions and is from a range of genres and so on. And we're still finding that kind of effect in those kind of studies. So I would say I would say that maybe isn't necessarily the case. I mean, you could explore that even more systematically by only playing like really negative, awful music to people.
I think it feeds into like the individual differences thing as well. So there might be a song that somebody really loves, but somebody else had a really unpleasant experience whilst listening to it or something. That would have to really wheedle out what upsets people to do that, and then so my second question was like, have you seen any kind of age effects based on how people can listen to music? So like older cohorts, for example, like the music might be less available to them, particularly in their reminiscent club, whereas now increasingly you can listen to music all of the time. So I just kind of wonder what effect that might have on like creating some like emotional variance. Like for always listening to music, is it going to maybe increase or decrease that emotionality? It's always there, and it's like the soundtrack to your life, but then also what always assumed to it, so it's less.
Yeah, so everything is associated.
Yeah, everything has a music, and like if there are like really specific events for like older generations that there was music playing for that event and music wasn't playing throughout their whole life. I mean, I've constantly got my headphones on, music always playing, whereas other generations perhaps might not have listened to music so much.
Well,
Jane, join in, if I may, because I'm thinking about how my father, aged 93, told me that his music with my mother was, their music was the Schubert B flat opus Boston Sonata. And he said We played it the whole weekend we were in bed together.
Oh.
The first weekend we got together after 10 years when they hadn't seen each other. We spent the weekend in bed and we only just got up to keep turning the record over because of course it was the 78 and it stopped up for 3 minutes. I promise you, that generation, if they listened to music, they listened to music. They didn't have it, they listened to it with as much passion as we do. They might not have been carrying it around in their ears. It might have been a smaller repertoire. But I think we need to beware of making assumptions.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think partially the point was that actually she was saying that since people are listening to music so much, they actually might not have as many autobiographical memories because music is associated with every single event you've ever done. So it might not be as good of a cue.
Yes, no, you're absolutely right. I'm sorry, I kind of went off on one. It was just such a lovely, it was just such a lovely memory.
Yeah, well, I think that's it, is that I wonder if we're kind of decreasing the emotional value of music by always having it on. It's impossible to not really.
No, I was going to say, it's really interesting, isn't it? Because I was wondering the same thing, that I remember, when I was younger and I had cassette tapes, I listened to the same cassettes lots of times, whereas I don't do that now. I listen to a much wide, I probably listen as often, but I listen to a much more variety, so I don't have the same re-engagement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we have found, one thing that I was thinking was, in the Reminiscence bump work, so, we looked at different age groups of people, and the older adults, they get the Reminiscence bump, but they also get a similar bump for liking of music that was released during that period when they were teenagers. But with the young adults, we get the Reminiscence bump of memories associated with music from that period. They don't like that music, they're kind of flat. So they don't show that sort of peak in liking that music, which kind of points to that idea that people are listening to a wider range of music, not just the music that was released when they were teenagers now, the people that are teenagers now. But interestingly, they do still have autobiographical memories associated with that music, which you can kind of understand, when they go to maybe a school dance or they're in the car with their friends, they're still listening to pop music of the sort of their time. but when they're actually listening in everyday life, they might be listening to a wider range of things, so they actually don't really like it as much.
Yeah, even smart speakers change this, don't they? Whereas I would have listened to my one cassette, I now say, Alexa, play me some folk music, or there was a wider amount available. And while we're sharing in a safe space, my equivalent to Barbara's story is that when I was in labour with my first son, the midwife said, "Oh, you can put on some music if you want," and I brought a playlist and speakers, and the playlist was all quite gentle, nice, relaxing music. And then When Irish Eyes Are Smiling came on. Now, I don't know why that was on my playlist, but it just jarred so much. I was in a lot of pain at that moment. I just can't bear the thought of even thinking about that song. It brings back all those memories of being in labour, and even kind of Irish folk music brings it back a little bit, which is such a shame. It's kind of out of bounds for me now because of those negative associations.
It's a huge argument. I had a PhD student who's actually didn't pursue the PhD, but who was looking at improving people's experiences of endoscopy by playing music. So there's this whole thing. There's a whole literature on people bringing music into, well, it may be the labour ward, or it may be some kind of painful process. And I remember once having a very, very uncomfortable procedure done, and it was the surgeon who said, "It will relax me if I listen to music, do you mind?" And I kind of went, it depends on what the music was, but you know what it was? It was the Four Seasons, and I can't listen to it. It just makes I'm still wincing to think about it.
Also,
that's 30 years ago.
That's an unfair question, really, isn't it? The surgeon saying, "Do you want me to be relaxed or not relaxed?"
On the other hand, what he did have was very nice photographs on the ceiling, and I thought that was a really good thing. But I kept lying on my back looking up. At least I was looking at the wheat fields. I thought that was considerate. not the music. Mind you, when my mother had her hip replacement, we had a long discussion. She had to have it with an epidural. She couldn't have it on general anaesthetic. And we had a lot of discussion about what she ought to listen to, because again, they said she could listen to music rather than we thought. We tried all kinds of things. Thought the opening Rheingold would be quite good. All of it. The Anvil chorus, because there's a lot of song. Yeah, she went with La Mer, which is not, you know, to the speaks it have plenty of big Russian sounds. But they work quite well.
Yeah. I've got one more one. Well, if anyone else has one, then I will. It's been quite a nice concluding one. I mean, while you were talking about the reasons of, although it doesn't have to be a concluding one, when you were talking about those reasons that music might evoke autobiographical memories, some of the things you mentioned there made me think of Ian Cross's work that we know, and I really like these ideas and these theories around music as a special communication system, and one of those theories is that music is special because you can engage with it and you can take away something very powerful, but that is also very personal. Unlike a linguistic exchange where there is more direct meaning, music is indirect and has what you would call floating intentionality. Do you think any of that plays into some of the results you've got around music being quite a powerful trigger?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think one thing I've been starting to think about sort of ties a bit into what Jane was asking earlier, is that this kind of multiple ways in which music can be a memory cue, right? So, and that kind of links to floating intentionality. So the idea that music can cue an autobiographical memory because you heard that music during the event, right? But it can also cue memories in a lot of other ways, and we've kind of been finding like all these other different pathways too, right? So music can also cue a memory because you heard a similar type of music during the event, or it can cue a memory because the emotion of the music. So I said this example in the earlier session, like there was a triumphant piece of music, and a guy said, I remembered winning a boxing championship, like, and that music wasn't playing at, you know, at that event. So, you know, it can be kind of like, you know, some kind of something about the genre of music being similar to something else. It can be like the emotion kind of triggers an emotion and then triggers a related experience. It can be, you know, something with the lyrics just remind you of some other association with the memory that the words sort of resonate with what you remember. So I think like this idea of like, you know, it not being a sort of unitary like one way that music can cue memories is quite important for future research, to try and tease out what are the ways and how often do they happen, and why do they happen in certain contexts and not others, and so on.
It's so interesting, isn't it? And it's so clear that it does happen. It happens a lot, and it happens in really powerful ways, but it's complex. But it's brilliant because you've got so many bits of research that tap into lots of those different ways this can happen. But what's next? What's your next big research question?
Well, that's a good question. So like I mentioned, yeah, there's some individual differences stuff. We're doing a sort of encoding task where we have these kind of everyday scenes that people see, and they hear music playing with them, or they hear other sounds playing with the scenes, and then we have a sort of a memory task where they like hear the piece of music and say, can you remember what scene was with it, and can you describe the scene, and so on. So looking at how effective they're actually able to code the memories and what details from the scene you remember in response to music versus other cues. So I think that's interesting. I think, trying to compare music as a cue to other cues from like the same event. So for instance, like if I played you a piece of music from your wedding versus I showed you like a photo of the building where you got married, would you recall different aspects of that memory in response to music versus another cue? So because I think that's quite interesting, trying to kind of control the event so it's the same event but comparing music to something else. And yeah, I don't know. I think the final thing is kind of trying to bring together memory, music, and imagination. So I mentioned that we're doing this project with Lisa Margulis, who works on music evoked narratives, so imagine stories evoked by music. And the idea that we want to kind of see whether, for instance, if you play music for people and they recall autobiographical memories versus you play, say, the same music for people and they recall an imagined story, is there actually some kind of overlap? Because obviously, like, when you imagine things, you don't kind of just completely recreate something new. Your imagination is constrained by memory processes.
Yeah.
But similarly, your memory is a sort of imaginative process. It's a reconstructive process, right? It's not like you don't remember things exactly as they happened. So we're kind of starting to look at the parallels between imagination and sort of memory.
That's really, really interesting. And I was thinking when you played the clip that people had said sounded like cowboy music, or it reminded me, I was thinking of My Honeymoon, which was in Calgary, where they have the rodeo, but nothing to do with, no direct links with anything, but those associations happen, don't they? Fascinating. Has anyone got any last questions? Anything on YouTube, Larry? Well, then we should thank Kelly one final time and retire to the bar. Thank you very, very much, Kelly. Thank you for everyone.